In the last lessons, we learned how to use style sheets. But in order to get actual style sheet superpowers, what we have to learn is how to use selectors, and particularly how to combine selectors to complicated rule sets. And so that's what we are going to look at now. Now we're here in a brand new UI Builder project. Let's just recap what we did last time and basically get us to the same state. We have a style sheet that I just added, an empty style sheet. There is no visual object in the hierarchy yet. So let's just add the same class that we had last time. I think it was called red square. And now let's remove this window. And now for the red square, we gave it 100 pixels for width and height, and some sort of reddish background color. Now we need to add at least one visual element to our hierarchy. Drag over the class, and voila, the class has this styling. Now you can see we again get this this border issue, so we have to go to this width, border width, set it to 0 pixels, and now it's gone. This might be some theming issue. I assume either it's a bug or it's some theming issue that it's by default adds this border, but I would rather put my money on a tiny bug that we have found here. Nevertheless, our element is styled. Now, if you remember what we did last time, we basically had a couple of elements and then we threw different classes on those elements. Now, one kind of restriction that this has is that when, let's say, you have, like we had last time, 3 elements and they all have a red square class, and now you still want to do something different with some of those elements. So obviously you could set some inline styling again, but with pure classes, you would get some difficulties to say, okay, I'm not only interested in selecting elements by the classes that are attached to them, but I also want to do some different selection. And those other options that you have is what we will cover now. And the first way that there is, beside adding classes to elements, is to get element by IDs. Now, so far we basically always had, we left those visual element names kind of alone. Now let's change that. Let's actually give this element some name, because we only have one. We can name it something like element. And now this is the ID. This is basically the name of this element. Because it's an ID, it should be the only element that actually has this name. So keep this in the back of your mind, that IDs by kind of definition should be unique. And now let's see how can we utilize this ID in our actual style sheet. So what we have to do is up here where it says add new selector, we remove this dot because we don't want a class now. We put in a hash and we write elem, and that is exactly the element that we are having right here. And when you hover over this thing, you can see the actual element in the hierarchy is already selected. So there you can already see that you kind of used the right selector. If I would have mistyped, if I had a typo in here, it would not have found this element. But because it's exactly the same name that I used for my element, it's finding the element, and that way I can also select it. Now, in order to see if that actually works, or to prove that you can do the same thing that you can do with a class, let's just change some styling here. Maybe now let's take the border again and let's give it some radius, let's say 10 pixels. And you can see the element gets, the styling is applied to the element that we kind of selected here by this ID. So we have 2 ways to select one specific element here, one by ID, one by class. Is that enough? No, that's not enough. There is also a third way how we can select the same element, and that is by type. Now, what does type mean? That might not tell you that much so far, because so far we were basically only working with visual elements, with kind of pure visual elements. But when you look at this library, and we will cover this extensively later, you can see all sorts of other elements that you can find here, and those are elements of different types. So you can have labels, buttons, toggles, and lots of other elements. You can add your custom elements later here. So you can basically have indefinitely many types of different elements. But the ones that we've been working with so far are just visual elements. So if we want to select this visual element that we have here, all we have to do is type in visual element in our selector box. And you can see this is our visual element. But what you can also see is that it's selecting kind of the whole canvas, which is a little bit weird. And the reason for that is that when you have this canvas, you actually always have some semi-hidden kind of root element that you normally don't really style or do something, or at least you don't treat it as your other elements. But it's always there, and it's also a visual element. And so now when we added this visual element selector, it will basically select all the visual elements in our hierarchy. And it so happens that those are 2 in this case, because we have this, this semi-special root element as well. However, obviously, when we apply any specific style to that, it will also work. So let's just now say we will give this a top margin of 50 pixels. And we can observe what happens here. Now those orange boxes are the actual margins. And you can see we get 2 of those boxes because we selected both elements, and so this style is applied to both of those boxes. One, the bigger box that is covering the whole canvas, and our small element is kind of stacked beneath that. Okay, so if you just saw a little jump on the screen, don't worry, everything is all right. There's nothing wrong with your video. I just had to cut here because a few seconds ago, for your video, a few seconds ago, my my computer just went down, and I hadn't saved all the latest changes, and I had to just recreate the screen. I hope that is roughly what we ended with. So maybe the one or the other of you might have noticed that I was trying to be sort of clever with those elements, and I was trying to kind of sneak in something that you might or might not have noticed, which is that we basically edited different properties on those different selectors, right? Technically, we could have edited just the same thing on all of them. And there's a reason why I actually didn't do that. Now, if you see on those visual elements, we set this, this top margin, and you can see that by this this kind of white, on this white tiny rectangle here on the side, that is denoting what was actually changed on this selector. When we go to the class here, you can see we don't have this white rectangle on the margin property, but it's also changed, right? Because it's referring to the same element. But if you want to know what was changed on this element, you again search for the white rectangles here on the side, and you can see on the class we actually changed the oh yeah, we had this issue at the beginning where we wanted to get rid of the border. That's why it's marked here as changed. And our actual changes were the size and the background color, right? You can see white here and white here. And then on the ID selector, again, all those properties, because it's referring to the same element, are set in the inspector. But if you want to see what this specific selector is actually setting, you again search for white markers, and you can see that on the element selector we changed the radius. Now the reason why I did this was because if we had changed only one property, we would probably not have seen the same effects as we did so far. So what do I mean by that? Now, let's just say we take the visual element here and we go to the size property, and let's say that we give this for the visual element, we say we want this size to be, I don't know, let's say 800 width. And what you can see, nothing changes. Although we are setting the size of this visual element selector, nothing changes. So let's now go to the class and let's try to change it here for, let's say, 500. And now you can see it does change. And now let's go to the actual element ID. And let's say that now here we want to set it. What did we set? We set 800, 500 for the class. So let's now make it even smaller. And let's say we want to go 200 on the element selector. And now it changes back again. So why is that happening? And the reason why that is happening is obviously what we are trying to do here. We are setting styles on one element, always the same element. We have 3 different ways to style the same element. And when we change the same property, that means that those settings are basically competing with each other, because an element cannot be 800 pixels wide, 500 pixels wide, and 200 pixels wide, right? It can just be one of those 3 things. So there must be some rule in place that decides which one of those selectors actually wins.